You're listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Amandeep Sodhi, Member of Parliament for Brampton Centre. Elected to office for the first time in the 2025 federal election, Sodhi is a member of the so-called 21st Century Club, a group of 4 Gen-Z Liberal MPs born in this century. Thanks for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Teresa.
So I want to talk about, I want to go back to the beginning of your political career. I know, you're somebody who has been involved before becoming a candidate, but when you became a candidate, it was a really weird time in Canadian politics. So I believe you got nominated like within 2 weeks of Justin Trudeau stepping down. 6 weeks later, we had Mark Carney come on as the new Liberal leader and therefore Prime Minister. A few weeks after that, we were into a general election. So things had changed quite a bit from the time that, you submitted your name to the time that the writs were dropped. I think, we all saw the polling at the time. It wasn't looking great for the Liberal Party. And, particularly in a number of ridings in the GTA, which included yours. A lot of people would think at the time, perhaps, that this was a long shot candidacy. What do you think about all that? Why did you decide to run anyway? A lot of people, only want to run if they think they can definitely win. Maybe you thought that anyway because of your grit. But what did you think about that whole time, and what made you decide to run for politics in the first place?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you for your very well-rounded question. So I've always been involved in politics. I've always been part of the Liberal Party. I think I was around 10 or 11 years old when my dad started taking me to events with him. My grandfather immigrated from India to Canada in 1970. So being a second generation Canadian, my dad always went to Liberal events. My grandpa always went to Liberal events, and so did I. And so when this opportunity came up, I know that the Liberal Party wasn't doing really well in the polls. I knew that there was a chance that I may not win. But one thing that my parents always said to me is stay true to yourself and stay true to the things that you believe in. I believed in our party. I believe in our core values, beliefs, and principles. And I was ready to stand by that during a tough time as well. And there's going to be good times, there's going to be tough times, but standing with your party when it needs you the most shows actual unity and solidarity. And that's what I believe in and what I wanted to stand with. And one of the reasons why I got into politics to begin with is because I knew that there was a change that needed to happen in the world. There needed to be a change. There's a little bit of a personal touch to this, but my mom is a registered massage therapist and currently suffers with arthritis and osteoporosis. And early 2023, her and I, we were having a conversation. She had just come back from work. She had her hands kind of like balled up in a fist because her hands were hurting her so bad. And she was having an arthritis flare up. And I had asked her, well, Mom, why don't you just kind of, have a career change, find another job. And it was honestly easier said than done in that moment. And she had said to me, she's like, well, I can't. She's like, times are tough. Affordability is at an all-time high. She's like, I've got you and your brother to take care of. I have a mortgage to pay. I've got car insurance. I've got bills, groceries, you name it. I've got it. Right. And that's kind of when it really hit me, was that I know my mom is suffering, and I know that there are millions of families across the world and across Canada and thousands within my riding that are also suffering. So I want to be able to make a change, not just for my mom, but for other people out there, whether that's, seniors, our youth, or our middle-aged people that are facing the same issues. And one thing that my mom always said to me was, be the change that you want to see in the world, right? Like, the sky's the limit. We have all the power in our hands. And being born and brought up in this country, we have endless opportunities to be able to do that. And so that's one of the reasons why I had gotten into politics. And this beautiful opportunity came up last year to run in my home riding, the riding that I was essentially born and raised in. And I had said, well, there's no better time to enter into the political world than there is right now. And if I win, that's absolutely amazing. And if I don't win, then at least I tried. At least I can, say to the people of Brampton Centre, to myself, to my family and friends, that I tried. I tried to make a difference. I ran in a federal election at the age of 23 years old with no experience. I touched thousands of hearts. I met thousands of people. I created all of these beautiful connections within my realm and within my riding. So I had nothing to lose. I was going to gain something out of this regardless, and I'm very happy of the outcome and that I was elected. So that's a little bit around that.
I want to challenge something you just said, which is that you had no experience, because when you were talking about growing up in a political family, or a politically oriented family, if you will, because usually when we think political families in Canada, we think of these dynasties like the Fords, the Trudeaus, whatever, right? But it's not always necessarily, oh, I inherited a political seat from my parent or grandparent or whatever it is. We do have lots of that. But you were talking about growing up in a family where politics was discussed, but also acted upon. You get out into your community, you try to make things better. My grandmother, who lived in Brampton for much of her life, she, similar experience to what you were just describing. She had come here from the Azores. She was very politically minded. She came during the time of Diefenbaker. She would rail about him to her death. Like, she was very, very, opinionated about politics. And that's something that was passed down to her kids, down to me, her grandchild. And it's a really interesting experience when you have that familial connection to politics and that focus on politics. Because I think we talk a lot about experience in terms of jobs and things like that, but you're surrounded by political thinking all the time in your family. Do you think that was, something that meant you were destined to run for office, or was this still something that you had to actively choose, as you said, as a 23-year-old?
I think there was a little bit of both. I definitely think that we manifested a political career for me, especially being involved within the party and within politics from a very young age. And I pursued my undergrad in politics. I had a women in politics club throughout university. So I think there's a little bit of manifestation going on, but ultimately I did choose this for myself at 23. I know that there's people that want to wait until, their 30s, 40s, 50s. I think the average age for a politician is about 50-ish years old. So I know that there's people that make the choice to wait, but I personally am someone who believes in, missing 100% of the shots that you don't take. And I said, let's take this shot. I might be young. I might not have a lot of like real life work experience, experience being in office, or being a political figure, or just even a public figure, right? I was a normal 23-year-old who attended events, worked as a legal assistant, just got out of university. So yeah, I think there was a mix of both for sure.
You mentioned your age. You're young. You're not the youngest one to win a seat in Parliament. The youngest person to win a seat in Parliament was 19 years old, which is wild to me. But I have always thought that it's important to have people of all ages, experiences, backgrounds, etc., because that's what the Canadian public is as well. So I think it's really important to have those kind of perspectives in Parliament, and that, age should not be a barrier at all. But not everyone shares my viewpoint, of course. So, you've talked about how on the campaign trail, even now as an MP, that, because of your age, some people doubt whether you can represent them, whether you have the skill set, whether you have the experience. I think the experience question is always interesting, because there are so many different types of experiences that can be applied to this kind of work. And unless you've been a legislator before, which most MPs who end up getting elected have not been at any level. So, you're in good company there. But unless that's the case, there's a lot of different experiences that can come in handy when you take office. But again, not everybody agrees with that. So on election night, you won with 611 votes, which is incredibly close, and a testament, I think, to your hard work on the campaign trail. But how did you convince the people of Brampton Centre to put their faith in you as an MP?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't easy at all. I had a lot of people look at me and be like, "You're the candidate? You?"
Right.
And I was like, "Yeah, me." And they're like, "Well, what do you know about anything? You look like you're just a kid." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not just a kid." And I think that was the biggest thing, was challenging what they were saying. And I said, "Well, I may be young, but I'm smart and I'm educated. And I also have the drive and the will to fight for you." And I said, I brought up the whole thing about representation within the House of Commons. I said, we need young people and we need youth voices in Parliament, right? Because a lot of people would say to me at the doors, well, we're afraid about what's going to happen for this next generation of kids. There's the youth unemployment rate is so high. Youth mental health is at an all-time high. Our youth are politically disengaged and not aware. So they're like, what do we do? And I said, well, you elect me. You elect someone who is part of that youth group and who's part of that youth representation and who can provide that representation in Ottawa. And I had just said to them, I said, I could be talking to a 45-year-old in front of me and I'm 23, but you face affordability issues. I face affordability issues. You own a home one day. I would also like to own a home, right? So I think adding in that personal touch and letting them, because I sometimes feel like politicians don't show that personal side to them. And I kind of wanted to be a little bit different. So I showed a lot of my personal side. I told them stories of where I could 100% relate to them. I told them stories about my friends who are struggling and have to live on their own. However, I'm grateful that I am still living with my parents here at home. But I understand the issues that they're facing. And I think that's how I was really able to gain their trust. It's just adding in that personal touch and personal connection. And I think that's kind of what people long for these days, because after COVID, the sense of community, neighborhoods, friendships, like everything just kind of disappeared and people just became very distant and cold with one another. But to be able to have a conversation with someone at your doorstep and connect with them one-on-one, I think that's what really, really helped.
Yeah, I think, I have always said in politics that authenticity is king, as is empathy. And those are, two sides of the same coin, I think. And that really is what you're talking about, coming at people as your authentic self. I think there's this perception of what a politician is, and people try and be that. And it doesn't feel great when you're engaging with somebody like that. You really want to know who the person is. It does bring up something else, which is that, you run for office and you have your own viewpoints on things, of course, because you are an individual. You also have your party platform that you have to support. And then there's the views of your constituents as well. So that's a lot of things to go represent in Parliament. How are you finding that balance so far?
I'm honestly finding it a little bit tough because, like you said, there's different views and beliefs all around you. But what I think helps guide me through this process is understanding and listening to my own personal morals and beliefs. So trusting my gut, trusting my intuition. I mean, I have some constituents who may have, contradicting views and beliefs than I do, which then contradict government position and policy. So I kind of just listen to myself and use my judgment and say, okay, this is the situation that we have at hand. Is the solution to listen to myself, to listen to party, to listen to constituents, or can I find a middle ground between the three of them and work accordingly? So that's kind of just what I do. I assess the situation. I have a little scrap journal where it's literally just scribbles and doodles. And if I go back, I don't even know what I wrote, but in the moment, it kind of helps to brainstorm the idea. And I'll just kind of sit there for 5-10 minutes. I'll do that. And then I'll weigh out my pros and cons and I will move forward accordingly.
That's, that's the advice that I give to anyone in politics is have a good sense of yourself and what you stand for, because there's
Yeah.
going to be a lot thrown at you throughout your political career, whether you're a staffer, a politician, whatever it is, an activist of any kind. And the best way to stay true to those values that you came in with and still be the same person when you leave politics one day is to actually hold true to those values. The other group that we haven't touched on yet that you represent is Gen Z. So we've been talking about your age, but you are a different cohort than has been previously elected, of course. So you're one of 4 Gen Z Liberal MPs elected in this election. I've heard people call you the 21st Century Club, which I think is a cool name. I don't know if you guys go by that, but do you feel some responsibility, sort of nationwide, to represent your generational cohort? I'm a millennial myself. A lot of politics for a long time has been driven by boomers. There's a lot of different groups there, but Gen Z hasn't typically had a voice to this point. Do you feel some pressure to represent them?
100%. I do. The pressure is on, honestly. And that's one of the reasons why me, Jake, Tatiana, and Faris created Youth Caucus to begin with, is because this is the first time we've had 4 Liberal MPs who are from the age of 23 to 25. This is the first time we've had a youth caucus within the Liberal government. So all of us feel that we really need to amplify our voices and amplify the voices of those who elected us, because we understand that our generation is the generation that's going to carry Canada forward, that's going to lead the future of our country. And it's important that we empower our generation, the youth of today. And so I definitely feel that sense of responsibility. I know there's not just young people who elected me in, but the concerns of the parents is also what drives that sense of responsibility, because I know that there's parents out there that are worried about the future of their children. So I don't feel that I have a sense of responsibility just to our youth, our Gen Z, but also to their parents as well, who are day in and out worrying for them. So the pressure is on.
It's a really good point, because a couple of months ago, I think it was a couple of months ago, I was having a conversation on this podcast with former Premier Dalton McGuinty, and he brought up a similar point, which was, like there is the younger generation, but there's also the people who care about them. So you mentioned their parents, but also their grandparents. So when you're representing Gen Z, you're also representing the concerns of many generations for that generation, right? So it is a really important role. You mentioned Youth Caucus. I want to talk about that more, because that's a really cool innovation that we haven't really had in the past. But it is a way for you and your colleagues to sort of come together, compare notes, see what's happening in their communities, also the places that you might visit across the country, and your work on committees and things like that. How's that going so far? How did that come together? I'm really interested in how this was formed in the first place.
Yeah, so the 4 of us, we were kind of just sitting in the lobby outside the chamber, and we were just talking about issues that we see in our community on all different levels. And I can't remember who it was, but one of us was just we should just form a youth caucus. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. We should form a youth caucus. And quite literally within 15 to 20 minutes, we had picked out a chair, a vice chair. We had booked a room, called an official meeting, and we were like, that's it. We know that this is needed. We know that there are issues out there that are affecting our youth, and youth issues are Canadian issues. And so we're going to have a youth caucus, and we're going to have weekly meetings on Mondays from 6:30 to 8:30, and we're going to invite in ministers, and it's going to be open to the entire caucus, because their experiences, their lived experiences, are going to be so insightful to us. And a lot of the MPs that we work with actually have kids themselves, right? So it's called Youth Caucus, but it's actually an all-age caucus. So everyone really joins, but we're kind of the ones facilitating the discussions and asking questions and stuff. And one thing that Youth Caucus really has been doing, whether that's speaking up at Ontario Caucus or National Caucus, is letting the rest of the caucus know that we are here for them. The new legislations that are coming out, the new bills, any work that the ministerial offices are doing, we've told them to use us to their advantage. So cater the bill in a certain way where it also will target directly youth. And there hasn't been too much movement on that because we kind of came into the session, it was full force, and now we're in Constit Week, and those are conversations we just had last week. So I'm excited to see what happens over the next 3 weeks until next Constit Week. But yeah, so far so good. So far everything's been going very, very well. And we were also looking at one thing that Youth Caucus wants to also focus on is bringing in the youth vote back into our party. We saw some statistics and in National Caucus that said people 18 to 34 mostly vote according to like TikTok, and specifically women out of that statistic are more likely to get their views and stuff from TikTok. So one thing that we want to do is also create a Youth Caucus TikTok, because we understand that we need to be where the youth are for today, right? So our youth are on TikTok rather than Facebook and Twitter. We need to be in our schools talking to our youth, because no one our age who is not interested in politics is going to search up liberal or conservative policies. What is the government doing for me, or whatever it is? But our main thing is just to amplify the voices of today's Gen Z.
So you touched on a pile of things there that I want to get a bit deeper on. So the first one is, it did not occur to me that the rest of caucus would, maybe drop in on your meetings, which makes a lot of sense. Something I think about all the time is how MPs and MPPs and, whatever the local level is, they often form youth advisory committees in their communities, right? So that they can get young people involved, hear what they're caring about. Sometimes there's like seniors ones and stuff like that too. Are you giving the advice that people should do that? Are you helping to inform how those are structured? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm personally getting my youth council started. It's underway, and our Constit office is working very, very hard to get that set up by the end of the week. So at National Caucus last week, we had literally advised all MPs that they should have a youth council. And then all of our youth council chairs should kind of, circulate thoughts, opinions, all of that. And then bring it to Youth Caucus so that we can push the agenda forward. And last week, actually, at Ontario Caucus, there's 70 of us there who said we need to have a meeting in Ontario Caucus, quite literally just for youth issues and how we can engage our youth. So I think just within the last couple of weeks of us bringing up the whole youth issues, use the youth, have a youth council, in like 2 or 3 meetings, it's already made movement to the point where the chair of Ontario Caucus actually said, we will have a meeting delegated just for youth issues, which is a 2-hour meeting with 70 to 75 Ontario MPs. So I think that it speaks volume to just the work that we've done in the last couple of weeks.
The second thing that I wanted to pull out of that was, where the youth vote is going. So this is something I have been very concerned about myself, as, like an elder millennial at this point, I guess. But we had a provincial election as well, just before the federal election. And in both cases, the youth vote, you're well aware, but maybe our listeners are not, that every time there's a big election in Canada, there is a simultaneous youth vote that is conducted at high schools. And the youth vote in both the provincial election in Ontario and the federal election in Canada we're very much conservative leaning. Conservatives form minority governments, I think, at both levels. So there is a change in the voting patterns for Canadians. We usually, there's this assumption that young voters are progressive voters, and no matter what, they're going to vote Liberal, NDP, Green, whatever it is. There's also, like, even within the conservative movement, there's a sense that youth aren't with them, but that is definitely flipping right now. We are seeing that in the data. How are you guys approaching that outreach? Because that is obviously more on the political partisan side than the, constituency type work. But as a political party, as the youth voices in the political party, what is your advice for the party? How are you working towards bringing back those voters into the fold? What does that look like so far?
So far what that looks like is fighting misinformation. I think that the Conservative Party is very, very good at like taking clips through committee and QP and kind of like spewing them around into this false narrative that like quite literally didn't happen and is not true. So fighting misinformation is a big one. We see that the youth vote has been far conservative leaning, or they either vote conservative or they don't vote. Like, they don't vote Liberal. And I think it's because of the misinformation that's being spread online. It's easier to believe that someone is bad rather than to believe that they're good. It's harder to see the good in someone than it is to see the bad. We're very quick to be like, oh, I don't like this person because of X, Y, Z. But it's hard to be like, oh, I actually do like this person because they do this, that, and that, right? And I think that's a big thing that we are trying to find out ways on how to fight. But we've said to the party, and we've said to, the rest of the caucus groups, whether that's Ontario, Quebec, National Caucus, we've said to them that we need to be loud on our messaging. If we look at statistics, I think the Conservatives in the last election spent almost $10 million on advertising, on social media, and our numbers are nowhere near that. And I said, we need to be like head to head, like neck to neck, shoulder to shoulder with them. If we see that misinformation is being spread, which it is on a daily basis, but some of the bigger issues, we really need to combat that misinformation with our own messaging, and we need to be loud with it. We are always on the defense side, and I said we need to play offense at this point. Like, why are we playing defense? It's like the Conservatives will bash us, and then we'll say, okay, well, guys, we're doing this. And I'm like, why are we not just sending that message out first before they even have an opportunity to say something? Yeah. And LRB and all of that has realized that, and they are taking it into account. And that's what the entire caucus just pushing for that, right? But a big thing like we're doing is specifically fighting misinformation in youth, and to call it out when we see it. I have family members and younger cousins and even some siblings that like to troll me and say, actually, well, your Liberal government isn't doing anything because you guys are whatever it is, whatever BS that they want to pull out. And I will be like, oh, well, like, where did you hear that? Facebook, TikTok, where? And he's like, yeah, TikTok. And I'm like, okay, actually, that's not true, because, I'll give you a prime example. It was right before we went on break, and there was this video of one of the ministers that was going around online, and my younger brother had brought me the video and been like, oh, like, look at what's happening. He doesn't know anything, and blah, 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 blah. And I said to him, I said, dude, this video is so fake. I said, I remember sitting in QP, and this is not what happened at all. I'm like, actually, this is what happened. And I outlined what had actually happened. And he's like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. The video shows completely different. And I'm like, this is why we don't believe everything that we see on the internet. And I'm like, this is why our kids are voting Conservative, because they're so quick and easy to like attract the attention of their viewers. Like, they'll have this major headline, they'll have a very angry clip of them speaking in the House, and then they'll use a clip of one of our members and be like, actually they said this when in reality they didn't. So I think it's all because of the misinformation that's being spread.
So something I personally believe is that all of our campaigns going forward are going to be digital first. And I don't mean that in the sense of you won't be canvassing or anything like that anymore. I mean, most of the communications will begin on digital in a huge wave and then, filter down into communities online and in person. And I'm glad you brought up TikTok because, I was not on TikTok until I started this podcast, and I was like, well, the youths are there, so I must go on TikTok. But it's an interesting place. It's not a place I spend a lot of time on otherwise. But it's really interesting some of the demographics you see when you start to do a communications push like this podcast requires. Some of our biggest listeners on TikTok are actually Gen X, which is very surprising to me. That's not who I would expect to be on there, right? But then the podcast on Spotify is heavy rotation with young men between the ages of like 18 to 34, which is also not the audience I would have expected to have. So the digital is really interesting because you can see in real time from the analytics the audiences you're capturing, and they may not be what you expect. But to your point, young people get their news from TikTok now. They do not get it from news sites. They do not get it from Facebook, which is maybe a blessing. But they get it from TikTok. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is our complete failure as a party to engage with influencers or newsfluencers, if you want to call them that. We have not built these relationships online with people who have big followings, with people who trust them, who are also progressive, and who do push back against, conservative misinformation. But we haven't built up those relationships. We've really seen digital as a broadcast tool as opposed to an engagement tool. What are your thoughts on that? And has your youth caucus put any thought towards what digital looks like going forward? Because I don't think it's going to be what it has been, the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. So one of the things that youth caucus understands is that social media and this digital world is constantly changing, and we need to, like, as a party and as a caucus nationally, we need to be able to adapt to those changes as well, right? Facebook and Instagram, like, statistically, LRB knows that we don't do good on those. But TikTok is something that, if used properly, we could do better on, because they also have the other statistics which say that the biggest vote share that we're missing out on gets their opinions from TikTok, watches TikTok. So it is something that we're pushing for as a party, to get more digitally involved and evolve with them as well. So I'm excited to see where that goes, but I think all of us are pushing for that. There's some talks about us doing like an Ontario caucus advertising, so something that comes out of all of our MOBs, because it's stressing and showing the importance of digital advertising.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned evolving with it too, because there's a history in political parties. We've seen this in the US, where a political party gets really, really good at digital and the new technologies, and then they're in government and they sort of atrophy and they forget to keep up with the times, and then the other party leapfrogs them, and this goes back and forth. We saw it with Bush and Obama and Trump, and we've seen it in our scene as well with Polyev. I think we can all agree that he's very good at this, especially on things like YouTube. But something that's been interesting to me is how these platforms really do follow young voters, because, well, young people in general in their usage, because you have, YouTube now does the shorts, right? Which are the 90-second clips that you can view vertically on your phone, and, those get higher profile for folks. But now TikTok is doing 60-minute clips to compete with YouTube, of course. And then you have Meta with Instagram and Facebook trying to copy both of them and being more video focused. What's the video sort of strategy for you guys? Because I do think video is king, and that's why TikTok has sort of become the lead influencer platform for young people.
Yeah, so I think one of the video strategies that we want to use is like a day in our life, because that is like very, very popular right now. So, you know, from the morning to the evening, like, come along with us. Like, this is a day in our life. You know, we're now headed to house duty. And what does house duty entail? Well, house duty is, you know, where we sit in the chamber and then we sit in the lobby, and then we're basically protecting our house. And some sort of like an interactive video is what we think is going to work better. Making a video, like looking directly at a camera and talking to it, people are more likely to scroll after a couple of seconds, or maybe scroll instantly. But a video where, you know, you've got a camera following you and you're walking around and like, oh, hey, John, oh, hey, this, oh, by the way, did you know this? Like, having it be a little bit more interactive, like, people are more likely to kind of stay and watch the video. And I think that's going to obviously gain us more viewers and stuff as we continue this digital journey. But we know that the biggest strategy that we need to do is be different and stand out. So do get ready with me's, do a day in my life, do like a morning routine as a young politician. So you wake up, you get out of bed, you eat breakfast, you check emails, and then you rush out of the door. Like, you show that you're a real person and that your life is not perfect and everything that you see on social media is not real. I actually, you know, was 20 minutes late to house duty, and that's okay, because we're real humans and we're real people. And I think just showing them that, it'll be a little bit better than their normal social media post with talking to a camera, or just a post with a long caption, right? That people don't want to see that. People don't care to read the captions either. So a video is much more entertaining, and that's our digital strategy.
You're wounding me as a writer, but yes, no, I 100% agree. I want to talk about the importance of youth caucus from an operational standpoint, because what people probably don't necessarily know is that when you form a caucus within the party, that caucus then gets to report into national caucus when it meets, which is a really, really important way to get on the agenda, because of course there's 169 of you in your caucus. That is a lot of people. You're not all going to get to talk every week, or maybe at all. You know, obviously there are people who get to weigh in more often because there's a flare up in their community that is, you know, really important to the Prime Minister's office or something like that. But there's a lot of you. And so, of, you know, being 4 of 169, normally you wouldn't get an outside voice. But because of forming Youth Caucus, you're able to get onto the agenda and speak more regularly to not just the entire caucus gathered, but also the Prime Minister, who obviously attends these meetings. So how important is that for your advocacy, you know, for your communities, but also for, you know, fellow Gen Zers? And, you know, without breaking confidentiality of caucus, because I know there is that. What kind of issues have you advocated about so far? I know we are not that far into your term yet, but what issues have you brought up so far?
Yeah, so being able to speak at National Caucus is something that we value so very heavily, because the work that we do just within, you know, closed doors is not necessarily something that's being brought to the attention of 169 of us, or to the Prime Minister, or to the National Caucus Chair. So having that time slot, whether even if it's for a couple of minutes, it's very, very important for us to be able to like go and voice what we've done over the last week to combat youth issues. And two of the biggest things that we have talked about is youth unemployment and youth mental health. I think those, we've done a little bit like of our own talking and research, and I think those are the biggest issues. We've also are really focusing on youth unaffordability, and how we can make things more affordable for our youth, because I think the three of them all tie hand in hand. Employment, affordability, mental health. You don't have a job, you can't afford stuff, your mental health goes to shit. So it's those are the three things that we've really been pushing. And then there's a couple of other things that we are pushing as well, but we have not yet brought them up to National Caucus, and it's in the works of that.
Yeah, I think all those issues are obviously extremely important. The jobs one is something I've been really, really concerned about. You know, when I was in government, I was at Advanced Education and Skills Development, which is a fancy term for colleges and universities, of course. And we were really obsessed with the dashboard that we had on jobs and young people in jobs. And it has gotten far, far worse over even just the last few years. One of the things I'm really concerned about, I worked on the basic income pilot in Ontario, and even at that time, now 10 years ago, basically, I was really, really concerned about the jobs of the future for young people. All people, of course, but young people specifically, because if you can't get that first role on the job ladder, you can't get that entry level position, where do you go? And I think as we see AI expanding, which is something there's a whole minister for in your government, of course, as we see that expand, we start to have these questions of like, how does that impact young people and their career potential, because they're not getting the jobs that they used to. Youth unemployment is enormously large right now. I don't think it's necessarily improving. I don't expect you to have the answers for how to solve all these issues right now, but I imagine this is something that you and your colleagues are going to keep pushing on.
100%. Yeah, without a doubt.
So I want to talk just a bit before we sort of get to the end of our conversation. I want to talk about the other roles you have in Parliament, because of course you aren't just a youth advocate or an advocate for Brampton Centre. You also have some other roles on committees, and I think people don't always understand all the different things that MPs are involved with. So you're on the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. But you also belong to a number of parliamentary associations, which is a whole other thing that people don't really think about. So you're on the Canada-US Interparliamentary Group, and I'm reading this because it's so long, Canadian delegation to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Parliamentary Assembly. That's a mouthful. But what that essentially says is that you're really, really focused on Canada's place in the world, and then also what that means for who comes to this country and how they contribute to our country. What are your thoughts on what Canada has to offer to the world in these really volatile times, and then also what we have to offer to new citizens, but also, perhaps folks who were born here in terms of the Canadian experience?
Yeah. Well, Canada is and was once everyone's dreamland. Everyone wanted to come here because it was the land of opportunity, and I still believe in that. And I think if Canada has the resources and the opportunities to make a 23-year-old a member of parliament, then there's nothing you can't achieve in this country with the right amount of dedication, grit, and hard work. But one of the reasons why, like the Citizenship and Immigration Committee was actually my first choice when I had put down committee and preferences, and I got it, and I was very, very happy, was because I come from a family of immigrants, and I know the belief and the view of some people with immigration, especially what happened during and after COVID and all of that. And immigration is essential to our country, but we need to be able to give back to our immigrants as well. And I do think that there was a surge in immigration, which necessarily wasn't the best idea or the best thing for our country at that time, because we over immigrated and it caused a strain on our economy. And now people think that Canada doesn't have a lot to give to the people who are immigrating to our country, whether they're, people on a work permit or international students. But I'm happy to work on those issues and to bring immigration levels back to a sustainable level, to show people that this is still the land for opportunity. This is still a country that has a lot to give. And then one of the reasons why I joined all of the interparliamentary associations and groups and all of that was because we're in this crazy trade war with the US, and Trump just one day says one thing, another day says the other thing, and accidentally calls our prime minister the president. And you never know what's going on with this guy. And I really wanted to see in depth how we can expand our relationships with other countries, how we're interconnected in different ways, and what Canada has to give to these people, so that I'm able to learn from my own knowledge and say, well, actually, we have a good relationship with this country, and we can, trade with them in this way and have this connection with that. So yeah, going back to what Canada has to give, I think there's a lot that Canada has to give. We just have to give it out in the right ways and do the right things to help that process.
Yeah, I think that's right. The sense I got was that the immigration surge we had was as a result of the premiers across the country asking for more workers, and we do need that for our economy. We know, in the healthcare sector, in the building trade sector, we don't have enough workers there. But at the same time, to your point, we actually have to support people when they come here, so it's not a nightmare experience for them, and so that it doesn't lead to shortages for folks who are already here. We need to be actually providing the right level of services for everybody, so that it is actually a net gain for everybody involved. Both to their own well-being, but also our economy. Before we wrap up here, I just want to ask one last question, which is, I always like to end on a hopeful note about how people can get involved and how we can all contribute more, because, it is pretty dark times out there, and sometimes you can feel pretty bad about how things are going, but there is a lot of hope, I think, when people do get involved. So what's your advice to young people who are often called apathetic, but I think care just as much as any other generation, or maybe are expressing that in different ways than people have traditionally done? What is your advice for them about getting involved in politics and actually channeling some of that energy into changing the way things are?
Yeah, no, that's honestly a great question. And I think that a lot of people are afraid to get into politics because of the stigma and all the stereotypes around it. But what I like to say is just do it. It's going to be scary. It's going to be tough. And I'm not the one to sugarcoat that this isn't something that is very, very hard. It is hard, but rely on your resources around you. One thing that I did when before I even made the decision to formally put my name in, is that I had requested a meeting with the rest of the Brampton MPs, and I went to all of their offices and I said, hey, like, I'm thinking about putting my name forward. I might be potentially working with you in the future. What does this job entail? What are some of the hardest challenges that I'm going to face? What's something that's going to be very easy for me that I might pick up right away? And that really, really helped me make my decision properly in the way that I wanted to. So I would say rely on the resources around you, talk to other politicians, and get involved. And even if you don't want to run straight for office right away, but get involved with youth councils. I think that's one of the biggest ways that you can amplify your voice and like get into the routine of being, a politician or someone who likes to work on policy or whatever it is. But youth councils, talk to those around you. See how you can get involved within your high schools, colleges, universities. They've got lots of political clubs. I mean, when I was in high school, we had debate club, we had mock parliament. When I was in university, we had, a group of girls and I created Women in Politics. So it was a safe zone for like women to talk about, what matters to them without worrying about what Connor is going to say, because Connor doesn't care about women's voices. So yeah, it's just, it's going to be hard, but my advice would just quite literally be to do it. Do it. It's never too early and it's never too late. So if you know you want to make the change, then don't wait. And I always say to anyone who I give advice to is follow your heart and lead with example. Don't ever do anything that's against your morals and beliefs and values, and lead with example. You want to be someone who people look at maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the road and say, I want to be like this politician. Or even right now in this moment, we'll say, I want to be like her, or I want to be like her when I grow up. So follow your heart and lead with example.
I think that is an excellent note to end on. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course, no worries at all. Thank you so much for having me. And honestly, it was a pleasure to do this podcast with you.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian communications company specializing in content creation, narrative development, and strategic communications. Our music was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.